I'd like to table not only the letters, but along with each, that the author of the one letter dated yesterday came from a Liberal-appointed senator, Senator Andrew Cardozo. And I'd also, in the second letter, like to table not only the letter, but the mega data that shows that the author of that original letter was a former Liberal Member of Parliament, Frank Baylis.
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. I'm Cypher.
And I'm Fox. We're back for part 2 of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs, or PROC, convened to discuss Greg Fergus and his behavior last week, which led to him losing the confidence of over half of the House of Commons.
And take it from us, the Liberals never waste an opportunity to try to lie in government proceedings or to Canadians.
And Mr. Speaker, you're probably not aware of that, but late last night, many members of PROC received letters supporting you in your role as Speaker. In fact, I believe at 10 a.m. this morning, the West Island Black Community Association was holding a press conference in Quebec supporting you and acknowledging you made a mistake. And I don't know about you, but I think every single one of us in this room has made a mistake in their life. It's what we do with it. We apologize, we learn from it, we move on. And I wanted to personally convey to you that you have people supporting you that have written to all of us to say that you're new. We all make mistakes. It's time to acknowledge we made a mistake. You've apologized for that mistake. We're going to put remedies in place. But I want to thank you and let you know that there is support out there for the role model you are playing for young Black Canadians. And I wanted to thank you for that.
Madam Chair, through you, I'd like to thank Ms. Romanado, and I was not aware of that letter, and I'm very grateful for that. And I hope that all Canadians can understand that if you do make an error, and then if you can show some contrition, and if you could have a real view, soul-searching view, put in place processes to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Okay.
That you can still make big mistakes and you can still have an opportunity to move on.
No, sorry. I don't accept that. I don't accept that one bit. And why don't I accept that? Because this is a gentleman that was previously convicted of an ethics violation. This is a gentleman who didn't make just an oops. This wasn't a misstep. This was an intentional act. It's not like he wasn't watching where he was going and stepped in a rut.
And it's not one little mistake that it was just, again, an error made innocently. What it signifies is that he is not capable of being impartial. And as Canadians, we need an impartial Speaker of the House. Because if the Speaker is favoring one side or punishing another side, I mean, we lose our voice in Parliament if we don't have a Liberal MP, because the Speaker will be punishing our MP, whether they're Conservative, NDP, Bloc, whatever. And, you know, I find it interesting that the other Liberal MP said, oh, well, you know, there was a letter written. Well, you know what? Fox went ahead and wrote a letter. And I'll be sending it off to Parliament today. And it's going to Mr. Julian, because he was the main NDP person on this committee. It's also going to Yves-Francois Blanchet, Pierre Poilievre, Jagmeet Singh, and Justin Trudeau. Now, I'm not going to read my letter to you guys because I did put it in my actual human name and I don't want it getting out. But the main point of the letter was, just as I stated, that you need an impartial Speaker, not just for the opposition parties to have a fair voice in the House, but because they represent us as Canadians, and Canadians need that fair voice in the House.
Right. The Speaker of the House should be seen and not heard and not be made the main story of politics. They're like a referee. If you see the referees, if you hear a story about referees, whether they're in football, soccer, basketball, hockey, whatever it is, then there's something wrong, because you don't go to those games to watch the referees, the umpires, whatever it is. you go to actually watch the game. And the speaker, they navigate and help keep people on track. They are not the process themselves. They keep the process on track.
Now, as of yesterday, the NDP was leaning towards having Fergus apologize again and issuing a fine. I'm going to tell you why that's not good enough, because a fine is not going to change the fact that Fergus is not an impartial speaker.
Yeah, again, this isn't like, let's take the lady, the Liberal lady at her word. You make a mistake, you apologize, and you move on. Well, here's the problem with that. He made the mistake. He apologized, sort of, on Monday morning. And then he left and went to Washington, and he did it again. Like, this isn't making a mistake, apologizing, and move on. This is making a mistake, apologizing, and then moving on to do the exact same thing because your apology didn't mean anything, and that all you're demonstrating is your continued partisanship. And he even said, well, I didn't know talking about my past being a Liberal is part of... Hello? Of course it is. What, you think you're just not allowed to talk about current events? You don't think talking about your past experience and you know, different people you've worked with and referring to the party as our party in a national newspaper, you don't think that's partisan? You know, to Cooper's point, that shows an incredible lack of judgment. And for somebody with that much lack of judgment, it demonstrates they're not ready to be Speaker of the House.
And him stepping down is not meant to be punitive. It's because he cannot do the job of an impartial speaker.
Right. That's the difference here. People aren't looking to punish him. People are looking to correct the situation of having a partisan speaker as Speaker of the House. That's the issue here.
So we're going to be sending off a letter to Parliament today, and we encourage you guys to do the same. If you feel strongly about this issue, write your MP, write the leaders of the parties, write Peter Julian, write all of them if you want, and tell them exactly how you feel about this issue and about being a Canadian who may not have a voice in Parliament if your MP is not on the favored side. And before I conclude, I just want to say thank you to Vesper Designs for helping me translate the letter into French because my French is atrocious. Well,
and on that note, on the note of writing a letter to Parliament, we wanted to follow up briefly. This doesn't really have a lot to do with this current video, but it's important. We wanted to follow up briefly on some member comments that we've received, some messages we've received of people saying, I write my MP, but they never write back. Or I write my MP and I don't even know if we got their letter. And, you know, we've said multiple times that that we know that they do. So I have proof now that they absolutely do. So we wrote Mr. Damien Urick, who, as you know, stood up last week and was named and asked to leave question period because he called Trudeau a liar multiple times. And we did a video on that. We had great response to that. And we talked about the fact that he really needs an email from you. And what we're so proud of our viewers for doing is actually emailing him. And we know that you emailed him. And you want to know why? Because we received this email back from one of the staff members from Mr. Urick's office. And we're not going to name the staff member to keep their anonymity. But this is what it said. Good afternoon, Cypher and Fox. Thank you for reaching out and for your support. We have received a number of emails citing your YouTube channel as the reason they heard about Mr. Urick taking a stand, so we appreciate hearing from you directly. I passed on your comments to MP Urick. Please know they are appreciated. So they get these emails and they read them. They really appreciate them, especially in these times when they've had to do something difficult. So we may not hear back from Mr. Julian or any of the other people that we're sending this letter to, but we do know they're going to see it. And that's the important thing.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Point of order, Mr. Duncan.
Wondering, just in reference to Ms. Romanato's comments about, she referenced some emails that we received last night, including the members of PROC's personal parliamentary emails. I'm looking for unanimous consent if I could table those two letters that were provided to us by email last night and also including in that a copy of the metadata from both of those. When you open up the Microsoft Word document, you can actually go and see who the original authors of those two were. I'd like to table not only the letters, but along with each, that the author of the one letter dated yesterday came from a Liberal-appointed senator, Senator 𝘨𝘬𝘢𝘺. And I'd also, in the second letter, like to table not only the letter, but the metadata that shows that the author of that original letter was a former Liberal Member of Parliament, Frank Baylis. I'd ask for unanimous consent that those full documents be tabled with the committee, please.
Whoa!
Oh, busted.
Busted indeed. Holy. Isn't that a lovely thing to... And, you know, it's so funny. The Conservatives are so good. They knew what was going to be tabled at committee in terms of, oh, well, you know, people are supporting you by writing these letters. So they were ready for that. They were completely ready for that by looking at this stuff. And I just have one question. What happened? What happened to this alleged independence of the Senate, Mr. Trudeau? This doesn't sound independent to me. Why are they writing letters to endorse a offending Speaker of the House of the Liberal Party? Why are they doing that?
Well, because it's their guys, their team. But you know what? Canadians are going to write some letters too, and we're going to tell them exactly what we think.
I don't think there's any concerns. I will be going through documents at the end, but just to remedy this, are we fine with that? We welcome them to the digital binder. With that, I will be going into a 6-minute round of Mr. Scheer, followed by Mr. Duguid, puis Madame de Bellefeuille, suivi par Mr. Julian. Mr. Scheer, 6 minutes.
Point of order, Madam Chair, just before you start my timer, is it possible for me to share my time with Mr. Calkins?
You can pass the floor as you please, as long as you stay within your 6 minutes.
Okay, could you give me a 3-minute warning then, and then I'll...
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
You want me to?
Is that okay?
Anything you'd like. We welcome you here anytime,
If she doesn't want to, she can say no.
Okay.
Sometimes
so
I get carried away.
This is going to start your time because I want to maximize our time.
Okay.
Excellent. 6 minutes to you. I'll tell you at 3 minutes. Mr. Scheer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's really important for Canadians to understand why this is such a big deal. You have come from a very, very partisan past, what some might describe as a hyper-partisan role, given the fact that you have served in executive-level positions. I think you said national, was it director of the Liberal Party, president of the youth wing. You were parliamentary secretary to the Prime Minister right up until the beginning of this fall session. Those are roles in which you are very close with the government, very close with the Prime Minister himself. And then to transition into becoming Speaker, to running for Speaker, members of Parliament have to kind of, once you won, we have to park that history of yours and trust that you're going to be nonpartisan and objective. The fundamental rule of being Speaker is also one of the easier rules to follow. And that is, you just don't do partisan things. You don't participate in partisan events. You don't say things publicly, or certainly not in a capacity wearing Speaker's robes or in his office that would have any connection to partisan activities or partisanship or indicating partisan favor. You did the interview with the Globe and Mail where you praised a sitting Liberal politician who, as far as we all know, is planning. He's currently an MPP. He's given every indication he's going to run again as a Liberal in Ontario. So it's not like it was a retirement party or he's going off to do something else. He's going to continue being an active partisan player in Ontario politics. You referred to the Ontario Party as our party. So all of this comes to light. In addition to this, we understand that your chief of staff, which I understand your hesitance to name certain people at committee, but he is listed on a public website, the Government Employee Directory Service, and that is Tommy Desfosse. I understand that he was very close with the current Prime Minister, Prime Minister Trudeau. He was his executive assistant at one point, and now he's your chief of staff. So having that hyper-partisan role in your very recent past, hiring someone right out of very quickly out of the PMO with a very close relationship, personal relationship with the Prime Minister, and now this comes to light. So I again ask you, you talked about the arbitrator and you didn't quite address the nature of my question. If you're a hockey player and you're about to play a game and you just saw the referee in his uniform giving a pep talk to the locker room of an opposing team, it wouldn't matter what the context was, would it? You wouldn't want that official refereeing your game. If you were involved in some kind of dispute that needed an arbitrator and you saw that judge in his robes at an event with opposing counsel, it wouldn't matter what the context was. You can't unsee that. You've now acknowledged there was a grave error of judgment. As many colleagues have mentioned, you are trusted to make on-the-spot decisions without time to run things through filters or decision-making trees. And we have to trust that that's coming from a nonpartisan and objective place. And I would suggest the fact that you didn't see that shows that you're still too close to the partisanship of it. You're too close with these partisan players that you don't see that for members of other parties, it would be a problem. So again, would just ask you, would you want to hear your case adjudicated? Would you want to play in a sports game, having seen the referee or having seen the judge or arbitrator involved in that type of display with an adversary or with an opponent? Would you trust that process having seen that?
Okay, so it took a while for Andrew Scheer to land the plane there, but he makes a compelling argument, and he was laying the foundation to really corner off any potential avenue that Greg Fergus thinks he's going to take in order to escape the question itself. So he did a good job of talking about, the fact that you spoke to the Globe and Mail and what you said in that news article was partisan. This is why it was partisan. You then did the video. That was partisan. He didn't even have to go into the Washington trip, but he ended up landing on the fact that he didn't even realize at the time that this was partisan is a problem. And Fergus didn't want to answer this question the first time it was asked. So let's see if he tries to answer it now.
Madam Chair, through you, I think it's really important, and I thank the honourable member for his intervention, the person who has sat in this role before. To go back to the ref analogy, quite frankly, it was a different league in which we were involved. But B, I also recognize that the member is right, that talking about my past, although when in that reference to the notion of our party, that was when I was actually a resident of Ontario back in the late 1980s, early 1990s, up until 1994. That was at that time that it was referred to that. Now, I do not like talking, I don't want to talk about my past here, because every time I do, I know that it sounds like I'm being partisan. It was a matter of record that at that time we were both members of the same party. It is a fact that I'm not validating that today. So I just want to make sure about that. Second thing, you'd raised the issue of my chief of staff. As you know, being speaker, that you are administrating a large organization here. My chief of staff left Parliament Hill in early 2018, almost 6 years that he's been occupying a senior management role in the private sector. He is someone who can help manage this, but more importantly, someone who also has political experience, who understands what it is to be a third political party, to be in official opposition and in government. So it's someone who has an ability to really hear and respond to the needs which are brought up by all folks. So that's the reason why this person was hired. He's calm, he's collected, and has a great reputation on the Hill.
Okay. I'm just shaking my head here because Fergus's response to, would you want that person to be adjudicating that? Oh, well, you're talking about sports. This is a different league. What?
It's so flippant.
Yeah, and he's trying to just dismiss it. Like, no, it's the same thing, buddy. You're a referee. It's the exact same thing.
Well, and then he goes on to say things like, oh, well, that was my past.
It's a matter
just
of record.
fact. Yeah. okay, fine, but you're not allowed to talk about it. The fact that you do not understand you are not allowed to talk about it because it is partisan means you are not suitable for this job.
Right. And he's going on to essentially defend it, meaning he doesn't get it.
Well, and this is why a fine is not going to do anything. A fine punishes what's already happened. Greg Fergus does not seem to understand what he did was wrong and why it was wrong and how he cannot do that going forward.
And how about this? If you're a speaker and you have to put in protocols that other people have to follow to ensure that what you're saying is screened prior to it going out, you shouldn't be in the job. That's like having a mechanic hired at a shop, and then you hire a second mechanic, and their sole job is to check that first mechanic's work. I would not want my car being worked on by a mechanic who has to have another mechanic check their work. It doesn't make sense. It means you can't be trusted. Because it all comes down to the judgment. And if the judgment needs to be scrutinized, then what value does that judgment have at all?
Well, it would be more like this, hiring somebody as like a master mechanic. He's like the top guy in the shop. And then having the people under him have to check his work. Why are you in that top position if you are not capable of doing it yourself without checks and balances and other people looking at your work?
Exactly. And as far as his chief of staff, he's trying to say, well, you know, he hasn't been in politics since 2018 and everything like that. Fine. But again, we've talked about perception. We've talked about optics. The perception in optics is that your chief of staff is a guy that worked directly for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Maybe not the best person to hire from an optics standpoint.
I do just want to put on the record that I apologize after you asked me to give you a 3-minute warning. I was so invigorated by the exchange that I had lost track of time. And I also went to go get bacon. So I do apologize for not having my priorities in order. Mr. Calkins will make sure you do have time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Mr. Julian, 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, if I understand Mr. Fergus, you're saying that regardless of the recommendations of this committee, that could go from sanctions or penalties to a resignation, you will accept the recommendations if the House of Commons adopts them. Absolutely, Mr. Julian. I will have to accept the process and the decision. I am a servant of the House of Commons, and so if the House decides that they no longer trust me and that I can't regain the trust of members of Parliament, and that the House believes that I no longer can be Speaker, learning from the mistakes I've made, I truly wish to rectify the problem and to regain the trust of the House of Commons, but if the House decides that this isn't possible, that the issue can't be remedied, of course I will leave.
Two things that I'm still trying to understand. First, you testified that on Saturday night you learned of the video in the same way all Canadians did. I want to know the actions you took immediately following that. Did you feel betrayed? Did you contact Mr. Fraser? What did you do in terms of the Liberal convention? And what did you do in terms of your own team, your chief of staff? The clerks have testified, Mr. Jantz testified that you were in contact over that weekend around the apologies. So I need to know what actions you took. And secondly, I wanted to ask in terms of the Washington trip. I mean, we went through this crisis. It was convulsions around the speakership in October. It was profoundly difficult for our Parliament and I think for Canadians. We're in what can be legitimately described as a crisis. Two parties that day, the Bloc Québécois and the Conservative Party, called for your resignation. Did you contemplate cancelling your trip? because it seems to me in a minority parliament that that kind of situation merits that the Speaker be here in the House of Commons, at the very least, having discussions with members of Parliament.
Thank you very much. Through you, Madam Chair, so 2 questions. So regarding what was my reaction on the Saturday night when that video came out, I was obviously sickened. The immediate calls were, how did this happen? This was not supposed to be a video that was supposed to go anything besides to a private gathering. So there was that aspect of it and trying to...
May I ask who you called?
I called my chief of staff, and we started to go through it. I did not personally call Mr. Fraser, and I'll be honest with you. The reason why is that I knew that this was such a situation. I did not want anyone to think that I was calling Mr. Fraser to influence what he would say. I'm going to let the process play out. I knew I had truth on my side, so didn't want to play around with that so that I would be accused afterwards. Did you call Mr. Fraser? Did you try to work things out? Your close friends and the like. Made sure that that did not happen. Regarding the Washington D.C. Trip, Mr. Julian, certainly we did contemplate canceling the trip. We actually went back and forth on this, had a huge discussion on this matter. We realized that perhaps because of the recusal. Of course, on a Monday morning at the first opportunity, I recused myself from any matter that would be coming forward to this debate, and I didn't to make sure that I wasn't going to be a part of the decision making as to terms of what the decision of the Deputy Speaker would be. Then we found ourselves saying, okay, well, should we cancel or should we continue with this? We had meetings set up with just over a dozen representatives, senator, and we also had diplomatic meetings that had been canceled beforehand when the previous speaker had resigned. These meetings were set up in terms of the speaker receives diplomats, and some of them are accredited from the United States. There were a couple that had been canceled.
Wait a minute. How is that possible? That isn't possible. And the reason why this isn't possible is because they asked the clerks, when was this Washington trip scheduled? Was this scheduled before Fergus was elected?
The Washington trip, was it scheduled under the former Speaker Rhoda?
And they said no.
No, this was a trip that the current Speaker initiated upon becoming Speaker.
So how is it possible that Rhoda had meetings planned with these people? And I mean, it's one thing to say, like, I mean, you probably even do it with the people in your life. Oh, I'll see you for coffee. Let's grab a coffee sometime. That's different from being like, okay, let's grab a coffee on, December the 14th at such and such a time and such a place.
Well, and this is the interesting thing, because I'm pretty sure the clerks know the speaker's schedule probably better than he knows it himself. So if Rhoda actually did have something scheduled, when Julian asked them that, when they said, was this scheduled before? Was this scheduled after? And they said, no, it was scheduled after. Pretty sure if something was scheduled, they would have said, well, the previous speaker had meetings scheduled in Washington with some of the diplomats, but they were canceled for obvious reasons. That you could understand. But Fergus is now saying, oh, well, there were meetings scheduled before, but they've been canceled. What are you talking about? And still, that doesn't make up for the fact that you scheduled it during a sitting session, and you're trying to say, well, I recused myself from the discussions on it. Sure, recusing yourself is one thing, but recusing yourself doesn't mean you don't show up to work.
Well, and furthermore, it wasn't a proper speaker trip because there was no delegation sent.
Right. 0. Remember, there's supposed to be representatives from each party that goes with the speaker.
And that didn't happen.
Doesn't even sound like they invited anybody.
No, it doesn't.
So, I don't buy any of this.
Yeah, something's not adding up here.
So, while I was going to be there, going to take up the flame and do that, we didn't want to cancel a second time. So that was the reason why we decided, let's go down to Washington. We'll continue with the responsibilities, and we'll be back in time for the decision by the chair, deputy speaker, rather.
This is a minority parliament, and it is unprecedented. What the clerk and the law clerk and the acting deputy clerk, or the deputy clerk, as cited earlier, were majority legislatures. Do you feel that your actions were appropriate responding to the crisis, learning what you learned on Saturday night, given the fact that this is a minority parliament where all parties have to work together?
I thought that the right action immediately was to recuse myself from any determination that would happen. That way members could feel that it was being done fairly. If I had stayed in the chair, it would not have been. There's no possibility that people could have seen that would have been fair.
Thank you. We're going to go into our fourth round. We will start with 5 minutes to Mr. Calkins, followed by 5 minutes to Mr. Noor Mohammed, Madame de Bellefeuille, et puis Mr. Julian. If we keep it tight, we will do 5 more minutes to the Conservatives, 5 more minutes to the Liberals. Then we'll have a 10-minute health break, and we will start with Mr. Fraser at about 22. Mr. Calkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Fergus, through you, Madam Chair, when exactly did you do the interview with Laura Stone?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll get back to committee. I'll have to check my agenda.
Okay. Mr. Fergus, you've been a member of Parliament now since 2015, if I remember, when you arrived here on Parliament Hill. In the 8 years that you've been a member of Parliament, have you ever had a conversation with any of your communications people, either in your constituency office or in your Hill office, saying, no, we can't send this out because it's not saying something that I want to get into the public domain? Something to that effect. I'm not asking you to name staff. I'm not asking you to name an issue. But have you ever had a conversation with anybody saying we have to be careful what we send out because we don't know if it's going to be in the public domain?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Calkins. Through you, Madam Chair, nothing comes to mind.
So you're saying that you don't vet, or you've never, ever redacted or changed anything that anybody has written or done for you on your behalf as Member of Parliament? You've never made an edit to a letter that's gone out? You've never made an edit to a social media post? You've never done anything to that effect that's going to go out into the public domain?
Oops. Liar.
Oops.
Liar. I do that with my Facebook, with my Instagram, with my social media constantly. And who am I? I'm a nobody. Come on.
This is the problem. They are so ready to lie because they think they know where the question's going. And then when it doesn't go where they thought it went, they're like, oh, I misunderstood. What did you misunderstand? Come on, man. You just got caught in another lie. Oh, I misunderstood.
No, you didn't. You just jumped the gun and gave an answer you thought would sound good.
Yep.
No, I misunderstood your question. Of course, yes, that has happened several times.
And you do this, I'm presuming, because I do this as a Member of Parliament, because once it leaves my office and leaves my care and control, I have no more control. I have no control over what that message actually is once it leaves my office.
This line of questioning is very, very strategic.
It's very cerebral as well.
Because there's no way out of it. There is literally no way out of it. So let's run this through. He's basically saying, as a Member of Parliament, has anything left your office? Any note, any thing that you've written that may end up in the public domain that you've said, no, don't send that out? So that's basically what the question was. And why is he asking that question? Because what he's trying to prove is that you've been a Member of Parliament for 8 years. You should have actually been in the practice of doing this. And if you haven't, you're incompetent. And if you have, then you know better. You should have known better when that video leaves your office. That could end up in the public at some point. So you should have known better. And
that's exactly it. Calkins is trying to show that you know better. You absolutely know better. Just because you haven't received quote unquote special training from your clerk, You know better as an MP who's been doing this for nearly a decade.
Right. This isn't a, oh, I was a new speaker and it's a new speaker issue. No, this is just general politics. That's what the Conservatives are trying to corner him on here. And this is very good because this is a one or the other. There's no skating around it. There's no getting away from it. It's a here or there type of question.
And experience teaches you that very early on in your career as a member of Parliament, does it not, Mr. Fergus?
That is correct, but Mr. Calkins,
no, that's fine.
May I just? Well, can I answer your question, sir?
Well, you already did. So, I mean, the premise of my question, I think you'll be able to get to where you want to go as I follow up with you here. So, the entire argument that I'm hearing here at this committee is that things are right or wrong depending on who as the recipient of the information. When we fully know as members of Parliament that anything that we send beyond our care and control of our offices, and in your case, the office of the Speaker, once it leaves, there is no guarantee that it will end up in the public domain. You've just told me, because it's common sense, because every member of Parliament does this, every member of Parliament has this experience, and you are an experienced member of Parliament, that you ought to have known, and you've apologized, and you ought to have known that something like this could end up in the public domain. And so how is it that with that experience, with all the years of experience of sending out correspondence, sending out letters, sending out social media posts, how is it that you didn't consult with somebody in the nonpartisan aspect of your office? And you, sir, have more staff than any other member of Parliament here, except for maybe a ministerial office. You have the most resources out of anybody at this table to help you in the administration of your duties and responsibilities. How is it that nobody in the nonpartisan portion of your office was even asked or approached before you sent this out, even though it's a typical practice for a member of Parliament, even within his own office, to vet these things, knowing full well that they could end up in the public domain?
Amazing question. Very well laid out, Mr. Calkins. Just so well put. We've seen this gentleman ask questions on a few occasions, but he doesn't sit in committee that we watch. You know, I know he's on other committees, but he doesn't sit on any of the committees that we watch too often. But when he does, it's always been on point. He's very careful, very strategic, and he has pinned Fergus in a corner here. You have the most staff outside of a minister to help you with this stuff. According to you, you've done this over the past 8 years since being a member of Parliament. You're not new. So how is it possible with all of this that you checked with nobody? How is that possible? Let's see what he says.
I'm flabbergasted that this happened.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Calkins, it's a difference of kind. I don't know about you, Mr. Calkins, but I'm perhaps have a much lower threshold for when I send out private messages than I do send out public messages. Things which are going to be going out to be published, things that are going out to be displayed publicly. I'm very careful about what is sent out. I'm a lot less cautious in messages that I would send to a longtime friend, or messages I would send to my family, or messages that I would send to even you, Mr. Calkins, if
with the greatest
we
of respect,
corresponding
Mr. Speaker, you weren't sitting in a lawn chair on the dock at the beach.
Interrupting. Well, 3 minutes and 30. I get it. It's your time, but I do need the person that we've invited here to provide information to be able to provide information, and that opportunity will be given, Mr. Speaker.
I'm finished with my comments.
Okay, so, I mean, given the fact that you were in your regalia, in your office, doing apparently a personal message, not an official message, you've now tried to reassure us, because the issue is one of confidence and one of trust and one of judgment. You've now you're trying to reassure members of this committee that putting protocols in place will somehow now give you the compass that you need in order to to fulfill your job in a nonpartisan way. When the reality is, all you have to do is just stop doing like, how hard is it to stop doing something that's partisan? Like, it's not that you need protocols in how you do things. You just need to stop doing some things.
Okay.
How hard is that?
Thank
Yeah, Jagger didn't want to finishing that question.
Well, and this is essentially what we said before, right? Why do you need all of this stuff? If you need all of this stuff, you're not the guy.
Well, that's it. That's it. If you want to be the top mechanic in the shop, you can't have somebody holding your hand all the time and telling you, you know, that's a lug nut, that's a wrench, whatever, whatever.
And then
you should know.
And then your excuse is, well, you know, it's different because I used to work on transports and now I just work on semis. Well, that's the same thing. It's the same thing. Well, I used to work on Porsches and now I work on Volkswagens. But they're cars. Yes, they're different, but they're cars. You're still familiar with what an engine is, right? You're still familiar with what a tire is, right? You're still familiar with what a carburetor is, right? Like, come on.
Thank you. I think it's a rhetorical question. Really short.
Well, if it is not hard to stop doing partisan activities, and this certainly wasn't a partisan activity. And as I also mentioned, the intention was not for it to be at a partisan activity. It was to be a goodbye for a longtime friend. But that being said, Madam Speaker, that is the reason why protocols are going to be put in place. All communications coming out of my office will be going through this process.
Right there.
This was not a partisan event. Like, come on.
He just said it wasn't a partisan activity. The reason why you're in committee is because it was viewed as a partisan activity.
This guy does not know the difference. That is the problem. And if you do not know the difference, you do not deserve to sit in that chair.
Yeah. This isn't a case of him lying, folks. This is a case of him being oblivious as to what a partisan activity is. And this is the problem. This is what the Conservatives and the Bloc are waving their hands about, saying, this is not the guy. Not the guy at all.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Speaker, do you agree it was poor judgment on your part while in Washington, D.C. to make comments at a retirement party for a Liberal friend of yours, Klaus Gramkow, talking about your history, partisan history with the Young Liberals of Canada? You're on an official speaker delegation that originated before you became Speaker. Do you believe your comments again that night were a breach of the code when talking about partisan politics on a speaker delegation?
I thank the honourable member, Mr. Duncan. I'd just like to provide some context, and I would also like to be able to provide context on those comments. I only use that reference just to place it within time. The error that I made is that I should have talked about the year that I met and not provide any other context around it. So, but given where we are and given what the situation is, it is an error, and it is one that won't be repeated. I will not be talking about my past.
So again, Monday morning, you apologized in the House and said you'd do better and you'd change course, and 24 hours later, you committed the same issue again.
Again, the change. I'm sorry, through you, Madam Chair. The point was it was just a biographical reference. The aha moment came a little later that week in speaking with a member of the opposition as to what it is. Just talking about my biography is a problem.
Aha moment.
Just so many excuses from this guy. Just take the responsibility. You are not prepared for this job when you don't even know what a partisan talking point is.
Yeah, like it's unreal, folks. It's unreal. And this is why half the House says no. Like, we're done. We are absolutely done with you. Clearly, you do not know what it means to be partisan. Because you can't be anything else. And as the Conservative mentioned, hey, so on Monday morning, you said, I'm sorry, this won't be repeated. And then 24 hours later, you did the exact same thing. And then you say, well, you know, it wasn't until I spoke to a member of the opposition that I realized, oh, you mean I can't talk about my past? What is wrong with you?
You know, I don't know what Fergus is aiming for here. At best, he's admitting complete and utter incompetence, which means he should not be Speaker.
Yeah, he's either incompetent, or he's incapable of being partisan, or he's both. Either way, get out of that chair, and the government should have an election for somebody who can actually navigate this for the next few months for the remainder of Trudeau's reign.